Young black quarterbacks are scrutinized in ways their white counterparts rarely experience. Every misstep is magnified. Every moment of confidence is rebranded as arrogance. Every deviation from the mold becomes a red flag. Shedeur Sanders is just the latest example. Despite handling himself with professionalism and restraint throughout a volatile offseason, Sanders has become the target of a smear campaign built on stereotypes, not substance. The recent controversy sparked by Rex Ryan is a textbook case. During an ESPN segment, Ryan accused Sanders of being lazy, disrespectful, and unwilling to study, without offering a shred of proof. These weren't critiques based on performance. They were character attacks rooted in bias. The double standard is clear. Quarterbacks like Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, and Dylan Gabriel have been given time to develop and make mistakes without being branded as distractions or attitude problems.
If you're into the real story and all the messy twists they don't show on highlight reels, go ahead and subscribe. And if you're sticking around to see how this Browns QB chaos plays out, you should definitely be subscribed.
Their flaws are treated as part of the learning curve. For Sanders, the learning curve is being framed as a flaw in character. And this isn't accidental. The timing of these narratives often coincides with moments of instability or competition, like the Browns' recent quarterback shuffle. When Sanders' name started to rise again, so did the unflattering headlines. It's a calculated move, whether by design or convenience, to undermine a young black quarterback before he even has a real chance to compete. The media doesn't just report stories, they shape careers. By allowing Ryan's claims to air unchecked, ESPN participated in the weaponization of racial stereotypes against a player who's done nothing to deserve it. The fallout isn't just reputational. These kinds of narratives impact opportunities. They alter perception inside locker rooms and front offices. They derail careers. Sanders, for his part, hasn't fueled the fire. He hasn't lashed out or created distractions. He's stayed quiet, let the media spin itself into a frenzy, and continued to work. That silence has been strategic, but it's also a reflection of how often black athletes are expected to take the high road while being publicly dragged without cause. This isn't just about one player. It's about how easily media narratives can turn into barriers for young black quarterbacks. When character attacks are disguised as commentary and broadcast as fact, the consequences are long-lasting and hard to reverse. Sports media has a responsibility to do better. It can't continue to perpetuate systemic bias under the guise of analysis. The treatment of Shedeur Sanders proves how little it takes to turn opinion into character damage when the subject fits a certain profile. The story isn't Sanders' attitude. It's the media's. Rex Ryan crossed a line. No sugarcoating it. He went on national television and accused Shedeur Sanders, a young, focused, high-performing quarterback, of being lazy, not studying film, and showing disrespect during practice. And he did it with zero evidence. No sources. No examples. Not even the vague, "I heard from someone" fallback that usually makes its way into these kinds of takes. Just straight-up character assassination. On ESPN. In front of millions. And that silence you heard from ESPN after the segment aired? That wasn't professionalism. That was complicity. The backlash didn't take long. Fans, former players, analysts, people from every corner of the sports world started calling it out. Not just because it was untrue, but because it was familiar. Because we've seen this before. Because when a black quarterback steps outside the carefully drawn lines of humility and compliance, the media suddenly changes its tone. Swagger becomes arrogance. Confidence becomes entitlement. Visibility becomes a problem. That's the context here. This wasn't just about Shedeur. This was about the decades-long pattern of bias in how quarterbacks, especially black quarterbacks, are covered. This was about narrative manipulation, pure and simple. Rex Ryan didn't invent this playbook. He just ran it on live TV. And the worst part? ESPN let him. This wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a heated debate where things got out of hand. It was a pre-planned segment on a major network. Someone wrote the question. Someone approved the rundown. Producers, editors, on-air talent, all signed off. And no one stopped to ask, where's the proof? Because if they had, Rex wouldn't have been able to say what he said. But they didn't. Because when the target is a confident, young, black quarterback like Shedeur Sanders, the standards suddenly drop. Nobody asked for evidence. Nobody challenged the take in real time. Nobody protected the integrity of the conversation. And that's the issue. This wasn't just bad journalism. It was lazy, racially coded commentary that was allowed to pass as analysis. And once it aired, it couldn't be taken back. People started sharing clips. Blogs picked it up. Debate shows ran with it. And just like that, the phrase Shedeur Sanders is lazy entered the conversation, not because it was true, but because someone said it loud enough, long enough, and on a big enough stage. That's how reputations get destroyed. That's how careers get derailed. And what was ESPN's response? Not a public apology. Not an on-air correction. Not even a clear statement acknowledging the harm. Just whispers of disciplinary action behind the scenes. Quiet punishments. Schedule changes. Soft edits. Business as usual. That's not accountability. That's self-preservation. And here's the thing. This story didn't blow up because Shedeur clapped back. He didn't. He stayed quiet, focused, professional. Handled it the same way he's handled every wave of media noise since he started playing under the spotlight. With restraint. The media loves to call athletes mature when they're quiet, but they still let others question that maturity when it's convenient. And that contradiction? It's everything wrong with how we talk about players like Shedeur. Because we already know that if he had responded, if he defended himself or called out the bias, he would have been labeled emotional. A distraction, not a leader. That's the trap. Stay silent, and you let the narrative grow. Speak up, and you get labeled difficult. So Shedeur did what he's always done. He let the work speak for itself. But let's be clear, he shouldn't have to. He shouldn't have to stay silent while his character is torn down. He shouldn't have to keep proving himself just to be treated with basic fairness. And he definitely shouldn't have to endure nationally broadcasted lies just because a former coach wanted to make noise. There's a long-standing double standard in sports commentary, and Rex Ryan's attack on Shedeur made it undeniable. Quarterbacks like Cam Ward, Jackson Dart, and Dylan Gabriel don't deal with this. They're allowed to develop without being picked apart. Their losses are part of the journey. Their struggles are coachable moments. But when Shedeur plays with flair or shows personality, it's spun as a negative. That contrast isn't just media bias, it's racial bias. And it's baked into the way the system works. And it's not just about headlines. These narratives influence front offices. They shape scouting reports. They bleed into draft discussions. They matter. Because when a coach or GM hears character concerns, even when it's baseless, it creates doubt. And doubt gets players passed over. This is where it becomes clear. Media narratives aren't just commentary. They're power plays. They decide who's ready, who's mature, who's worth the risk. And when those narratives are manipulated, especially when they're rooted in stereotypes, it becomes sabotage. That's exactly what Rex Ryan did. And ESPN gave him the stage. And yet, Shedeur's response? Still silence. Still focus. Still grace. Because he understands what's at stake. He knows that proving people wrong isn't just about football anymore. It's about fighting a system that's already decided who gets to be the hero and who gets cast as the problem. And in a twisted way, his silence exposes even more. It shows that no matter how clean your record is, no matter how disciplined you are, no matter how well you perform, you can still be misrepresented if the wrong person decides to rewrite your story. And that's what this all comes back to, story. Who gets to tell it? Who gets to shape it? Who gets believed? Sports media is a powerful machine, and when it runs unchecked, it doesn't just mislead, it damages. And in this case, it targeted a young man who's done nothing but play the game the right way. So now the question isn't just whether Rex Ryan will face consequences. The question is whether the industry will learn anything from this. Will networks like ESPN finally raise their standards? Will they stop prioritizing hot takes over truthful ones? Will they acknowledge the racial undertones in how they cover athletes? Or will they just wait for the outrage to pass, then move on to the next target? Because we know how this plays out if nothing changes. Another confident, talented black quarterback comes along. The media doesn't like how he carries himself. Someone questions his character. The narrative catches fire. And suddenly, he's not being evaluated on skill anymore. He's being judged on attitude, image, perception. That's not journalism. That's gatekeeping. And unless we start demanding more, it'll keep happening. But this time, the audience didn't just sit back. This time, people pushed back. They called out the hypocrisy. They demanded accountability. They rallied behind Shedeur not just because they support him, but because they're done watching the media tear down athletes who don't fit the mold. So here's the real takeaway. Rex Ryan got exposed. ESPN got exposed. And now the pressure's on. If this industry wants to maintain any shred of credibility, it's going to have to stop rewarding this kind of recklessness. It's going to have to start protecting young athletes from being carelessly thrown under the bus for views. And it's going to have to decide what kind of stories it wants to tell. Because if the answer is still whatever gets attention, the audience won't stick around. And Shedeur? He's not going anywhere. He'll keep showing up, keep leading, keep winning. Not just because he wants to prove people wrong, but because he never needed their approval in the first place. If you're tired of the double standards, if you're done watching athletes like Shedeur get targeted without cause, then say something. Drop a comment. Share this. Subscribe for more coverage that actually holds the media accountable. Because the old playbook isn't working anymore. And we're not buying the false narratives. Not today. Not ever. The fallout from Rex Ryan's comments isn't just about one man saying something stupid. It's about a system that let him say it knowing what it meant. Knowing the weight of his words. Knowing how they would land. And choosing to air it anyway. Because that's what makes this moment so dangerous. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't off the cuff. It wasn't a caught on a hot mic scandal. This was intentional. Planned. Polished. Packaged for TV. And that means ESPN, whether they want to admit it or not, chose this narrative. They let it run without question. No pushback. No challenge. No counterpoint. Just Rex Ryan, confidently stating that Shedeur Sanders is lazy, doesn't study, and is disrespectful on national television, as if it were fact. And then they moved on like it was just another take. Except this one had consequences. Real ones. You don't just accuse a quarterback of lacking work ethic without receipts, especially not one like Shedeur, who's been held under a microscope from the moment he set foot on a college field. This isn't a player who can hide behind the logo. He's Deion Sanders' son. He's the face of Colorado football. He's a top-tier prospect. And more importantly, he's black, confident, and unapologetic. And in the world of sports media, that makes him a target. Because let's be honest, this isn't happening to everyone. Shedeur isn't getting the same treatment as other QBs. When Jackson Dart has a bad game, it's youth. When Dylan Gabriel throws a pick, it's part of the process. But when Shedeur shows up wearing a designer watch or speaks with confidence in a post-game interview, it's entitlement. The same confidence that's praised in other quarterbacks is used against him. This is a tale as old as time in sports commentary. The moment a black quarterback strays from the buttoned-up image of humility the media is comfortable with, the whispers begin. The coded language. The double standards. The manufactured doubt. And Rex Ryan's segment was the loudest whisper of all. But what's worse than the words themselves is what happened after. Or rather, what didn't happen. There was no on-air apology. No clarification. No evidence presented after the fact to back up the claim. Just a slow, quiet walk back behind closed doors. Supposed disciplinary action. Probably a don't-do-it-again conversation and a temporary disappearance from the broadcast schedule. Meanwhile, Shedeur's name is still out there, attached to lies. This is why people don't trust the media. Because when a mistake gets made at this level, when a young man's name is dragged without proof, and there's no real effort to correct it, the damage sticks. The media machine just moves on, leaving the athlete to clean up the mess on their own. And Shedeur? He did clean it up. By keeping his head down. By playing well. by showing up every single week and letting the numbers do the talking. That's not just professionalism, it's power. The kind of power that the media can't control, which is probably what irks them the most. Because when a young black quarterback refuses to break, refuses to lash out, refuses to play the angry card, refuses to give them a soundbite, they lose control of the narrative. And that scares them. Shedur's silence? That wasn't passive. It was intentional, strategic, powerful. Because when the media expects you to react, and you don't, it forces them to sit in the mess they created. It puts the spotlight back on them. And suddenly, the question isn't why is Shedur being criticized? It's why was this criticism ever allowed to air? That's the question ESPN is dodging. Because if they answer it honestly, they have to admit that their editorial process failed. That their platform, their producers, their executives let a false, harmful narrative about a young man go live without a single checkpoint. And that means this isn't just about Rex Ryan. It's about everyone who let it happen. This isn't a bad apple moment. This is a system failure. And if they don't own that, it's only going to happen again. Next season, it'll be a different quarterback, a different analyst, a new lie, unless someone stops the cycle. And let's talk about that cycle for a second, because it's deeper than just bad takes. These narratives don't just hurt feelings. They derail careers. They reshape public perception. They impact opportunities. When a commentator says a player is lazy, that quote shows up in scout meetings. When it goes viral, it becomes a conversation point. When it gets repeated, it becomes truth. That's how power works in sports media. It's not about what's true. It's about what sticks. And this stuck. Not because it was accurate, but because it was designed to be sticky. The kind of take that gets clipped, shared, debated. The kind that draws in engagement. And if that engagement comes at the expense of a young black athlete's reputation, so be it. That's the unspoken rule. And the people who pay the price are always the same. So yes, Rex Ryan deserves to be punished. But more importantly, ESPN needs to be held accountable. Because until there are real consequences for spreading lies about athletes, they're going to keep doing it. They'll just rebrand it as controversy, as debate, as spirited discussion. But we know better now. We've seen how this machine works. We know how it eats people up for ratings. We know how it rewards outrage and punishes integrity. And we know how it only seems to spin out of control when the subject is a confident, visible, successful black athlete who refuses to dim his light to make people comfortable. Shedur Sanders is all of those things. And instead of celebrating that, the media tried to tear it down. But it didn't work. Because this time, the backlash was too loud. The receipts were too clear. And Shedur's response, his non-response, was too strong. He didn't fold. He didn't fight. He didn't feed the fire. He just kept winning. And that's the story they didn't expect. So here's the challenge now. Don't let this blow over. Don't let ESPN bury it. Don't let Rex Ryan sneak back onto TV without addressing it. Don't let the media reframe the story to make themselves the victims of cancel culture or overreaction. Hold them accountable. Because this isn't about punishment. It's about principle. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to the next Shedur Sanders. The next young, talented, confident black quarterback who dares to be more than just a quiet player in the background. This is about setting a new standard for sports journalism. One where opinion doesn't mean baseless accusation. One where criticism requires evidence. One where athletes, especially black athletes, are given the same benefit of the doubt that others receive without question. And if the media won't enforce that standard, the audience has to. So keep the pressure on. Keep asking for receipts. Keep demanding fairness. Keep calling out the double standards. Because if we don't, nothing changes. Just to be crystal clear, this isn't about protecting Shedur Sanders from criticism. Criticism is part of the game. Every athlete gets it. Every quarterback will be questioned, challenged, even doubted at some point. That's fair. That's football. But what Rex Ryan did wasn't fair. It wasn't football talk. It was character assassination, delivered with confidence, aired without challenge, and supported by nothing. No stats, no sources, no evidence, just a narrative, and one that's been used far too often to tear down black quarterbacks who dare to exist outside the mold. There's a reason this hit so hard, because for so many fans watching, it felt familiar. The accusations, the tone, the way it was said like it was just accepted knowledge. It mirrored what's been said about countless other players over the years. And it reminded everyone that no matter how much progress we claim we've made, the old rules still apply when someone powerful decides it's time to start swinging. And ESPN? They didn't just let it happen. They platformed it. They gave that moment a stage. And in doing so, they reminded the audience where their priorities really are. Not in accuracy, not in fairness, but in the kind of attention-grabbing controversy that keeps the algorithm fed. But this time, people didn't look away. They called it out, loudly, repeatedly, and that public pressure mattered, because the quiet, disciplinary action ESPN eventually handed down didn't come from journalistic integrity. It came from not wanting the brand dragged through another 24-hour news cycle. Let's not pretend this was accountability. Let's not pat ESPN on the back for damage control. Because here's what accountability would have looked like. A full retraction. A public apology. Acknowledgement that what Rex said was wrong, that it never should have aired, and that it had real impact on a young man's reputation. Instead, we got silence, editing, PR spin, internal conversations that they hope the audience will forget about in a week. But the audience didn't forget. And we're not going to. Because Shedeur didn't fold. He didn't complain. He just kept showing up. And now, it's on us to make sure that moment doesn't get swept under the rug like it didn't happen. So keep the energy going. Keep the pressure up. Support players like Shedeur. Question the systems that try to control their narratives. And don't let the media keep using commentary as a shield to avoid accountability. Because this wasn't just a bad take. It was a warning. And the response? That's what's going to define whether this industry keeps repeating its mistakes or finally starts learning from them. If you're done with the double standards, say something. Drop a comment. Call it out. Subscribe for more unfiltered coverage. And don't let these narratives win. Not on our watch.